The insurgent officer stepped into the clearing like he owned the forest. Emma Carter had owned him for 11 seconds. Crosshairs centered, breath half released, finger resting against the trigger guard, not yet committed, the way Donovan had taught her. Wait for stillness. Let the world go quiet. The world went quiet. Then the man's skull came apart. Emma hadn't fired. She pulled back from the scope. Wind hadn't shifted. The angle was wrong, 20 degrees off her position, maybe more. She ran the geometry in her head in the time it took her heart to skip one beat. Someone else was in these trees. The radio crackled. Donovan's voice, low and careful. "Carter, that shot didn't come from our side." Through the scope, a single pine branch trembled. Something, someone, had just moved. The ridge gave her everything. Emma Carter had crawled the last 200 meters on her stomach, moving through wet pine duff and the slow creep of pre-dawn mist, pulling herself forward on her elbows with the kind of patience that had taken 3 years to build and one bad deployment to perfect. By the time she reached the fallen trunk that would serve as her hide, the eastern sky was shifting from black to the deep, bruised purple that preceded first light. She did not move for 4 minutes after arriving. She listened. The forest breathed around her, a low exhalation of wind through the upper canopy, the drip of last night's rain from branch to fern to earth, the distant percussion of what might have been a woodpecker or might have been something else entirely. She cataloged each sound, filed it, waited for the pattern to establish itself. Only when she was certain the forest had accepted her as part of its own silence did she begin to set up. The rifle came out of its drag bag in components she had assembled in darkness, enough times that her hands no longer needed to think. Suppressor threaded, bipod extended and locked. She settled the stock into her shoulder, adjusted the cheek weld, and let her eye find the ocular lens of the Schmidt and Bender scope. The camp materialized below her. It sat in a natural depression between two ridgelines, a geography that trapped sound and mist in equal measure, giving the whole place the quality of something half-submerged. Emma had studied the satellite imagery for 6 hours before insertion, but imagery never captured the texture of a place. The camp was larger than it looked on screen. 14 structures, maybe 15. Low wooden huts with corrugated metal roofs, dark now but showing faint rectangles of orange lantern glow through shuttered windows. A central open area, dirt churned by vehicle traffic into parallel ruts, that served as both parade ground and loading dock. To the northeast, an antenna tower rising perhaps 25 meters, its red safety light blinking in the mist like a slow pulse. She cataloged it methodically. Southeast corner, an ammo storage building, heavier construction than the others. Padlocked exterior hasp, 2-man guard rotation. Northwest perimeter, vehicle pool, 4 trucks in one what looked like a retrofitted armored personnel carrier. Center east, a command tent, canvas sides rolled up 2 feet from the ground for ventilation, portable generator humming behind it. Then the satellite communication container. It was parked beside the command tent, and it was wrong. Not wrong in a way she could immediately articulate, just wrong in the way that certain things register as anomalies before the analytical mind can catch up. The way a veteran's peripheral awareness flags something before the conscious brain processes the why. The container was standard ISO dimensions, painted dull green, but it had been fitted with 2 external antenna arrays that were not standard insurgent equipment. Not even close. The cable runs were too clean. The weatherproofing was professional. Emma filed it. She had come up here for overwatch, hold the ridge, confirm targets for the intel team working the valley floor, report on command structure and logistics movement. She had not been told to ask questions about satellite communication containers that didn't belong. She was already asking. The light continued to build. Below, the camp began to stir. The radio beeped twice at 0617, the check-in window she had agreed with Donovan before insertion. She kept her eye on the scope and pressed the earpiece tighter with one finger. Overwatch, up. Good morning. His voice was the same as it always was, unhurried, slightly rough, like gravel under a boot. Master Sergeant Jack Donovan had been many things in his life. Marine sniper for 22 years, Fort Bragg instructor for 9 more. He had trained 2 generations of shooters and buried 3 friends who hadn't listened carefully enough. Now he sat in a forward operations support cell 300 kilometers away, technically retired, technically advisory only, and was the single most useful person Emma had ever worked with. Anything interesting? He asked. Command tent center east. Antenna arrays on an ISO container that don't match the asset profile we were briefed. A pause. She could hear him writing. Define, don't match. Professional installation. 2 separate arrays, different frequency bands by the looks of them. Cable management is too clean for insurgent fieldwork. This looks maintained. How's the canopy above you? She blinked. The non sequitur was deliberate. He did this, pivoted to environment when he wanted her to recalibrate her attention. Dense, 70–80% coverage directly overhead, thins out toward the ridgeline to my east. What's the wind doing inside the tree line versus your position? She had been tracking it. Surface at my level, 2 to 3 knots, east-southeast. But the canopy is catching something different. You can see it in the upper branches, maybe 8 to 10 knots, shifting between southeast and south-southeast every 4 to 6 minutes. That's a channeling effect, Donovan said. The valley shape is funneling prevailing wind, but the canopy is breaking it up and redirecting it. Every time it shifts south-southeast, your ballistics below 300 meters are going to want to drift left of your natural correction. You'll overcompensate if you're not watching the treetop movement. Emma adjusted her mental model of the shooting geometry. Understood. Now, the birds. She had noticed that too. Quiet to my west, normal activity to my east and north. How long has the west been quiet? She thought back to her crawl in. Since before I arrived, maybe longer. Something was moving out there before you got into position. His voice had not changed in tone, but she had learned to read the spaces between his words. Probably just wildlife responding to whatever spooked them first. Keep it logged. Logged. The satellite container, he said, returning to it without fanfare. Don't report it in your standard traffic. Route anything anomalous through the secondary channel. If someone put that equipment there, they may have eyes on the primary frequency. Emma turned this over. It was a significant implication to draw from a container in some antenna cable. But Donovan had been doing this since before she was born, and his instincts had a specificity that she had long since stopped second-guessing. Copy that. What else is bothering you? He always knew when there was something else. She thought about how to phrase it. The camp layout feels managed, not insurgent managed. Someone made decisions about where things go and why, and those decisions were made by someone who understood operational security at a level that doesn't match the asset profile we were briefed. Give me an example. The antenna tower is positioned at the highest point of the depression, but set back 12 meters from the perimeter. If you were insurgent, you'd put it at the perimeter. Easier to run cable, shorter antenna to equipment distance. But 12 meters back means it's not visible from the valley approach until you're inside the perimeter. Someone didn't want it spotted from the road. A longer pause this time. How long have you been watching this camp? 40 minutes. And you've already got 3 anomalies. 4, she said, counting the birds. He was quiet for a moment. She could picture him at his station. The cluttered desk, the topographic maps covered in notations, the cold coffee he always forgot to drink. Be patient today, he said finally. Don't let a developing picture rush you into early conclusions. Watch and record. Let the camp tell you what it is. And if it tells me something I wasn't briefed on, then we'll have a more interesting conversation at 1400. Check in at 1400 unless you have contact before. The radio clicked off. Emma returned to the scope. Below, the camp continued its morning routine. She watched a guard change at the ammo shed. 3 minutes late, the relieving man still pulling his jacket on as he approached. Sloppy. Normal insurgent discipline. She looked at the satellite container again. Nothing about that was sloppy. By 0900, Emma had filled 4 pages of her field notebook. She wrote in the compressed shorthand she had developed over years of overwatch operations. A private cipher of symbols, initials, and abbreviated tactical notation that read as nonsense to anyone else. The notebook sat propped against the trunk beside her right elbow, and she divided her attention between the scope and the page with the automatic rhythm of long habit. The anomalies had been accumulating since first light. At 0712, 2 men in civilian clothes had appeared in the camp's restricted inner compound, the area between the command tent and the satellite container that was, by every sign, supposed to be off-limits to non-combatants. They were not detained. They were not questioned. They walked through with the easy, purposeful gait of men who belonged there, carrying what looked like a maintenance toolkit, and they disappeared into the container for 45 minutes. Technicians. At 0831, a truck had arrived from the northern access road. Not one of the vehicles in the pool she had cataloged. A different one, newer, with plates she couldn't read at this distance. 4 men offloaded wooden crates under the supervision of a 5th man who stood apart, clipboard in hand, checking manifests. The crates went into the ammo shed, but the man with the clipboard went directly to the command tent. He was inside for 11 minutes. When he came out, he walked back to the truck, got in, and left. He had not spoken to a single one of the armed men in the camp. At 0847, Emma saw the first of the civilians. She had been watching the western perimeter when movement at the southern edge of the camp drew her eye. A group of 6 or 7 people emerging from the tree line, escorted by 2 armed men. Not prisoners exactly. They moved without restraint, without blindfolds or bound hands, but they did not move freely either. There was a compliance to their posture, a downward cast to their eyes, that Emma had seen before in populations living under sustained pressure. They were directed toward a low structure she had classified as a storage building, and they went without speaking. She wrote, "Civilian labor, not prisoners, controlled population." At 0903, she observed a guard post rotation that didn't match the standard pattern she had mapped. The change went perimeter north, perimeter south, ammo shed, container, but skipped the command tent entirely. The command tent guard had been standing the same post for 4 hours without relief. She watched him more carefully. His uniform was different from the others, subtle, same base color, same general cut, but the fit was better. The boots were different, and he was carrying his weapon with a 2-hand hold and a finger outside the trigger guard, muzzle slightly elevated, which was not how insurgent fighters typically stood post. That was a trained posture, a professional posture. Emma wrote 2 words and underlined them twice. Private contractor. She did not radio it in on the primary channel. She sat with it for a long time, watching the container and the tent, and the careful man with the proper boots, and she understood slowly that the briefing she had been given about this camp was either incomplete or deliberately wrong. Neither option was comfortable. The target appeared at 11:24. Emma had a name from the briefing package, Vasic, a mid-level commander in the regional insurgent network, wanted for 3 separate incidents involving civilian infrastructure attacks. His photograph had been in her mission folder, a low-resolution image pulled from intercepted communication metadata. She had studied it enough to be confident in the identification. He came out of the command tent unhurried, stopped just outside the canvas overhang to light a cigarette, and stood in the morning light with the specific self-possession of a man who believed himself secure. Emma found him in the scope and ran through the checklist automatically. Distance, 480 meters, confirmed against her pre-insertion range cards. Wind, current surface drift east-southeast, 2 to 3 knots. Upper canopy showing south-southeast at this moment. She adjusted 2 clicks left and waited for it to cycle back. Angle, slight downhill, 4 degrees. Known correction. Target aspect, 3/4 profile, left-facing. Head, neck, and upper chest exposed. Center mass available. Breathing. She was already in the slow, controlled rhythm. Inhale, partial exhale, hold in the natural respiratory pause. Her radio beeped. The command frequency, a short double click. She recognized the code. Target confirmed. Authorized to engage. She found the natural pause between heartbeats. The wind held. She let the reticle settle. 11 seconds. She was counting without trying to count. Vasek drew on the cigarette, exhaled, turned his head to say something to a man who had emerged behind him from the tent flap. Emma had the shot. She did not fire. Not hesitation. Nothing so crude as that. It was something more precise. A fleeting wrongness at the edge of her awareness. The same faculty that had flagged the satellite container that morning was firing again, wordless and insistent. She kept the crosshairs on him and waited. Vasek turned back to face the clearing. He raised his cigarette. The shot came from somewhere to her west. Emma knew it in the first quarter second. The sound signature arrived wrong, not from the direction of her rifle, not from any point between her and the target, but from behind her left shoulder and above, from somewhere deep in the western tree canopy. A suppressed round, but at this range and this atmospheric pressure, suppression only reduced the crack by so much. She had heard thousands of shots fired from dozens of weapons, and she knew, with the absolute certainty of pattern recognition, that this one had not come from her. Vasek dropped. No drama, just down. Emma's eye stayed at the scope for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to confirm the result and to observe the men around him scatter in 3 different directions. Then she pulled back from the ocular, flattened herself against the pine trunk, and began running the calculation. West and above, range to the sound source, roughly 300 meters. Elevation advantage over her position. She estimated 12 to 15 meters based on the sound angle. A hide in the canopy or on an elevated feature. The suppressor signature suggested a medium to large caliber, but the sound was cleaner than a .338, possibly a 7.62 by 51, possibly a 6.5 Creedmoor. A precision weapon, a trained shooter. She ran the math on the angle to the target. The shot from that position would have required a 20-degree offset from her own line of fire, firing through a gap in the canopy that could not have been wider than 2 meters. At 480 meters, accounting for the wind shift she had been tracking all morning, that was not a lucky shot. She pressed the radio key. Donovan, overwatch. Static. He was outside the check-in window. She had to work this alone. Someone made that shot. The thought was not alarming in itself. Snipers operated in pairs and in overwatch layers all the time. But she had no record of a second asset in this sector. Her briefing had been explicit. She was the only long-range element assigned to this operation. The intel team was in the valley, a kilometer south. No other shooters had been mentioned, which meant whoever had just killed Vasek either wasn't on her side or was on her side in a way that hadn't been shared with her. Neither interpretation made her feel better. She stayed flat against the trunk and let the forest settle around her. Below, the camp was in controlled chaos. Men moving in purposeful patterns, the command tent emptying, 2 guards repositioning to cover the northern approach where the shot might have appeared to originate from the camp's perspective. Good. They were looking the wrong direction. She began to look the right one. She spent 20 minutes looking for him and found almost nothing. Almost. The pine forest to her west was dense enough that direct observation was impossible beyond 60 meters. She worked the scope at low magnification, scanning systematically sector by sector, starting from the position she had estimated and working outward in concentric arcs. She was looking for the signs that a trained sniper could not entirely eliminate, the subtle wrongness of a shape that didn't quite match its surroundings, a shadow falling at an angle inconsistent with the light source, the compressed stillness of something alive trying to appear inanimate. She found none of those things. What she found instead was a pattern in the things that were absent. At the 40-meter mark, slightly uphill and north of her estimated position, a branch on a young spruce had been recently broken, snapped, not bent, which meant weight applied suddenly rather than gradually. The break was fresh, the wood pale and wet bright at the fracture point. At the 55-meter mark, a section of forest floor showed pine needles that had been displaced, not scattered randomly as an animal might scatter them, but moved in a directional sweep, consistent with a boot sole rotating on the ball of the foot. Someone had pivoted here, changed direction. At the 62-meter mark, and this one she almost missed, would have missed if she hadn't been systematically quartering the zone, a small pile of soil had been disturbed near the base of a mature pine, the kind of disturbance that happened when a bipod leg was planted and then retrieved. The indentation was no larger than a thumb. She measured the geometry between the 3 points in her head. The broken branch was at his height of travel. He had been moving, and something had caught his equipment or his arm. The pivot point was a direction change. He had heard or seen something that prompted him to adjust course. The bipod mark was his firing position. And the firing position was, she measured against her range card, here, at this trunk, facing east-northeast toward the camp, with a clear line through the canopy gap she had already identified. He had been 10 meters from her. Not at the same time. She had arrived before dawn, and she was certain, nearly certain, that the forest had been empty when she came in. He had positioned himself after her. He had found this gap in the canopy, this precise firing lane, and had used it, and then he had moved. He never stays in the same position. The thought arrived with the texture of an observation rather than a deduction, as though she were noting something she had already known. She filed it, filed the direction of his retreat, which the displaced needles suggested was west-northwest, away from both her position and the camp. He was gone, but he had been here, and something about the geometry of his movement nagged at her in a way she couldn't yet resolve. The route he had taken, approach from the west, position near her hide, fire, withdraw west-northwest. Every segment of it had a clear escape route. He had never committed to a position from which there was only one way out. He always leaves himself a way west. She wrote it down. At 1347, she intercepted the transmission. It came through on a frequency she had been monitoring as secondary background, a band used occasionally by insurgent networks in this region for logistics coordination. Low priority enough that it rarely carried anything worth logging. She almost wrote it off as routine traffic. But a word stopped her. Contractor security confirms package integrity. Extraction window remains 48 hours. Repeat, 48 hours. She pressed record on the secondary channel and kept listening. The transmission was short, less than 90 seconds, and the voice was professional, clipped, using a phonetic discipline that was not consistent with insurgent communications. The vocabulary was not insurgent vocabulary. Package integrity, extraction window, contractor security. These were logistics terms from a different world. She listened to the recording twice with her eyes closed. Primary asset protected. Do not engage contractor personnel. Any unauthorized engagement of contractor personnel will be treated as a hostile act under the terms of the service agreement. Service agreement. Emma opened her eyes and looked down at the camp. The camp that she had been briefed was a mid-tier insurgent command node. The camp with the satellite communication container and the professional cable management and the technicians with their maintenance toolkit and the guard with the proper boots and the correct two-hand weapon hold. She understood now what she was looking at. This was not an insurgent camp protecting an insurgent operation. The insurgents were incidental. What this camp was protecting was something else. Something with a service agreement and contractor security and a 48-hour extraction window. She reached for the radio. Donovan's window was still 15 minutes out. She sat with what she had learned and looked at the command tent and the satellite container and the careful architecture of deception that had been built around whatever was actually happening in this valley. And she felt the specific cold clarity that came when a mission changed shape entirely. Below in the camp, a guard walked his post, the man with the proper boots. Emma watched him and thought about the shot that had come from the west. A private contractor killing an insurgent leader, not protecting the insurgents, protecting the operation from the insurgents. She wrote, "This camp is not insurgent-controlled. Insurgents are cover. Someone is running a protected operation inside their structure." She underlined the last line. Then she wrote the question she didn't yet have an answer to. What is worth a 48-hour extraction window and contractor sniper security? The radio beeped. "Overwatch, up," she said, and started to tell Donovan everything. He listened without interrupting, a discipline she had come to recognize as one of his most important skills. Lesser advisors filled silences with reassurance or speculation. Donovan let her finish before he spoke. "The 48-hour window is the critical number," he said when she was done. "Whatever they're protecting, it moves in 48 hours. That means the extraction is already planned. Logistics are already in motion." He paused. "How big was the truck that arrived at 0831? "Medium weight, could carry 3 tons, maybe 4. "One truck for a 48-hour window." He was thinking aloud now, running his own calculation. "Whatever leaves in that window, it's not bulk goods. It's something compact and high value." Emma looked at the camp below, at the ISO container with its professional antenna arrays. The satellite uplink runs to somewhere. The technicians were inside for 45 minutes doing maintenance. You don't maintain satellite uplink for insurgent radio coordination. That's overkill by 2 orders of magnitude. What do you maintain it for? She had been thinking about it since 0900. Remote data relay, real-time reporting to a receiver outside the region, something that needs continuous connectivity to a corporate or institutional node. "So it's not a command post," Donovan said. "It's a reporting station." "Yes. Reporting what? To whom?" It wasn't a question. It was a direction, the shape of what she needed to find out. "I'll keep watching," Emma said. "Route everything secondary. And Carter," he paused in a way that made her wait. "If this is what I think it might be, the chain of command around this operation is not clean. Be careful what you report and to whom." She absorbed that. Coming from Donovan, it was not paranoia. It was a precise warning from a man who had spent 31 years watching institutions protect themselves at the expense of the people inside them. "Understood," she said. The radio clicked off. Emma looked through the scope at the camp below, at the container, at the man with the proper boots walking his post with professional economy, his eyes moving in the steady, systematic pattern of trained surveillance rather than bored guard duty. Somewhere to her west, a trained shooter had used a firing position 10 meters from hers and then disappeared into the forest like smoke. She was not alone on this ridge. She was not even sure she was on the right side of whatever this was. She settled deeper into her hide, adjusted her grip on the rifle, and waited. He moved at 15:21. Emma almost missed it. She had been watching the command tent. A second technician had gone inside the satellite container at 14:40, and she was tracking the timeline when the birds betrayed him. It was a small thing, a cluster of crossbills, 4 of them, feeding in the upper branches of a spruce 60 meters to her west-northwest. They had been there for 20 minutes, comfortable and noisy in the way birds were when nothing threatened them. Then all four lifted simultaneously, without apparent cause, and angled east. Something had moved below them. Emma did not turn her head. She did not change her body position by a single degree. She breathed normally, kept her eye at the scope facing the camp, and used her peripheral vision to map the western tree line. Nothing visible, which was the point. She began to run the counter-sniper playbook in her head, the one Donovan had drilled into her, not with repetition, but with reasoning, explaining the why behind each technique until she owned it instead of merely knowing it. He's repositioning, she thought. He fired from the northwest at 11:24. He's been in the forest for at least 6 hours. He knows I'm here, or suspects it. He's either moving away or moving to establish a new observation angle on this position. The second option was more dangerous. The second option meant he was treating her as a problem to be solved. She needed to make herself a problem he couldn't locate. The first technique was the scope glint trap. She had a spare brass shell casing in her right breast pocket, standard carry, useful for exactly this. She palmed it without moving her shoulders, angled it between 2 fingers, and positioned it at the edge of the trunk to her left, where afternoon light would catch it at approximately the angle of a scope lens. Not a perfect decoy, but a trained shooter scanning for threats would note a glint, file it, try to resolve it. It would cost him time. The second technique was the sound bait. She picked up a small stone from the ground beside her left knee. She had placed 3 there when she first set up the hide, a Donovan habit she had adopted. And at 15:28, she rolled it gently away from her position, down slope, where it skipped twice against exposed root before stopping. She watched. At 15:31, a branch moved. Not in the wind. The wind was from the east right now, and this branch moved against it, a single deliberate oscillation, and then was still. He was at her 2 o'clock, 45 to 50 meters. He had moved 50 meters north since the birds lifted. He was working around her, trying to get an angle on her eastern face. He's not trying to kill me, she noted with the detached precision of analysis. He's trying to see me. He wants to know where I am before he decides what to do about me. That was not the behavior of a shooter who had been ordered to eliminate her. It was the behavior of a shooter who was doing his own assessment. She let him look. She had her body behind the trunk, her profile below the sight line he would have from that position. He could see the scope glint, the decoy casing, and he could see the muzzle of the rifle, but he could not see her face or her hands or any element that would confirm whether she was positioned, tracking, or simply stored. At 15:37, he moved again. This time she marked his direction precisely, due west, withdrawing. He had seen what he came to see and had chosen not to engage. Emma filed the data point and returned her attention to the camp. He was not hunting her, not yet. The fog came in at 16:15. It rose from the valley floor in slow, deliberate columns, filling the depression where the camp sat, and then climbing the ridgelines on both sides like something patient and intentional. Within 20 minutes, visibility from Emma's position to the camp had dropped from 400 meters to somewhere between 150 and 200, and the upper canopy was beginning to disappear into a ceiling of gray-white murk that compressed sound and flattened distance into something unreliable. Emma pulled back from the scope and let her eyes adjust to the reduced visibility. The fog changed everything about the tactical geometry. She could no longer observe the full camp. The command tent and the satellite container were still visible as dark shapes, but the detail that made observation useful had dissolved into gray. The antenna tower was gone entirely, swallowed above the 40-meter mark. The vehicle pool was a suggestion of darker shadow against lighter ground, and the forest to her west was now a wall. She could hear more than she could see. That was the trade the fog offered. It muffled some sounds and amplified others, created acoustic corridors along the ground where sound traveled farther than it should and then disappeared unpredictably. She heard a door bang in the camp, 200 meters, clear as a shot. She heard something dripping in the trees to her immediate north. 6 meters, crystalline. But she could not hear the wind in the upper canopy anymore because the upper canopy had ceased to exist. She pressed her earpiece. Overwatch, radio check, static, then fragments. Say again, and then nothing. The terrain was eating the signal. Donovan had warned her about this. The same valley topography that channeled wind would play havoc with radio propagation in certain atmospheric conditions. Fog over a valley depression, warm air over cold ground. It created a radio shadow that could be total. She was alone with the fog and whatever was moving in it. She heard him at 1643, not clearly, not a footstep or a branch snap, something more subtle than that, a change in the quality of the silence to her west, a slight compression of the ambient sound that happened when a body moved through close space and displaced the air around it. She had spent enough time in forest to know the difference between the living silence of an empty wood and the held-breath silence of an occupied one. Someone was within 30 meters of her position. She did not move. She controlled her breathing, not the tactical respiratory pause of a shot cycle, but the slower, deeper control of someone who needed to become part of the environment. She dropped her heart rate by an act of pure will, a technique she had practiced until it was reflex, and she listened. 30 meters, then 25. Movement that was almost soundless. Almost, but not quite, because at this range and this silence, the small sounds were enormous. The faint compression of wet pine needles under weight, the barely audible whisper of fabric against bark. He was good. He was very good. He stopped at approximately 20 meters, slightly south of due west. She could not see him. He was inside the fog and the timber, and he was holding perfectly still. She imagined him at his scope or his binoculars, scanning the hide area, trying to resolve her position. She gave him nothing. For 7 minutes, neither of them moved. Then he withdrew. The sound of his departure was even less than the sound of his approach. He had read the stillness of her position and decided to disengage rather than commit. She tracked him by the barely there compressions in the ambient soundscape until he was 50 meters away, then 80, then gone. Emma exhaled. He had closed to 20 meters. In the fog, with thermal optics, he could have engaged. He had chosen not to. She was beginning to form a theory about what that meant. She did not trust it yet. The shot came at 1748, and it was not him. Emma had repositioned 30 meters east during a break in the fog, standard counter-sniper protocol. Never hold a hide after potential compromise, and was re-establishing observation on the camp when the round struck the pine trunk she had vacated. The sound reached her a fraction of a second after the impact. She was already moving, flat and fast, rolling left behind a cluster of exposed root mass, and pressing herself into the ground with the rifle tucked against her chest. She kept rolling until she had 3 meters of dense undergrowth between herself and the original position, then stopped and listened. The camp below was stirring. The shot had been suppressed, but not silent. In this fog and terrain, someone down there had heard something. She saw 2 guards moving toward the northern perimeter. She ran the geometry backward. The round had come from the south-southeast. The angle of impact on the trunk, she had seen it clearly in the half-second before she moved. A clean entry hole at approximately chest height confirmed a shot from below and to her right, somewhere on the lower ridgeline. Not from the west, not him. A second shooter. Coming from inside the camp's extended security perimeter. She pressed her face into the pine duff and thought very quickly. 2 snipers. One to her west, the ghost who had killed Vasich, who had closed to 20 meters and chosen not to shoot. One to her south-southeast, someone who had found a line on her original position and taken it. The south-southeast shooter was less skilled. The shot had been clean, but the positioning was wrong. They had targeted the hide she had vacated, not the hide she was currently in. They were working from observed data, from whatever triangulation they had done on her scope, glint, or movement. They didn't know where she was now, but they would work it out if she stayed static. She needed to move. She needed to move south and east, away from both threat vectors, deeper into the ridgeline terrain that offered more broken cover. She needed to do it without generating sound that the south-southeast shooter could use to relocate her. She began to move. 15 meters. Stop. Listen. 5 meters. Stop. The fog was thickening again. She could feel it, the way it changed the weight of the air against her face. And that was simultaneously cover and liability. She used it. Another 20 meters east, staying below the ridgeline crown, using the root masses in the fallen timber as stepping stones that minimize ground contact. At the 40-meter mark, she stopped behind a boulder and took stock. Original hide, compromised by south-southeast shooter, ghost sniper last known position, west-northwest, withdrawing. Current position, 40 meters east of original, behind cover, no immediate line of threat. She had thermal in her scope. She had always had thermal. She had simply not considered it as a detection problem until now. If the south-southeast shooter also had thermal, the fog offered her no concealment at all. She was visible in infrared, regardless of visual conditions. She looked at her scope's ocular ring. Standard optical with thermal overlay capability. She had been running optical only because the battery conservation mattered on a long hold. She switched to thermal, and she saw him. Approximately 280 meters south-southeast, prone on a low rock outcropping that jutted from the ridgeline at a natural overlook. The thermal signature was unmistakable, brighter than background, human-shaped, absolutely still. He had a weapon. She could see the muzzle extending beyond the rock edge. He was scanning. He had thermal too. He was going to find her. Emma pressed herself into the root mass and dropped as low as she could go, trying to reduce her thermal profile against the cold ground. Wet earth was thermal noise. It helped, but it was not enough. At 280 meters with a good thermal optic, she was visible. She had perhaps 90 seconds before he resolved her. She did the only thing available. She fired once. The round went into the rock face 6 inches below his muzzle and to the right. A miss deliberately. A warning. She was already moving before the echo had finished traveling, pushing west and north, back toward the harder cover of the dense timber. Behind her, the rock outcropping was empty. He had moved. Good. She had needed him to move, to react, to break his scan cycle. She made 50 meters before the fog swallowed her completely. She worked her way back to an observation position above the camp by 1900, approaching from a new angle, northwest this time, using a secondary ridgeline feature she had mapped during pre-insertion study. The fog had thinned to intermittent patches, and her thermal scope gave her clear resolution on the camp below, even in the failing light. The trucks were unloading. 2 of them had pulled up alongside a structure she had categorized as a storage building, the one the civilian workers had been directed to that morning. The loading bay doors were open, throwing a rectangle of yellow light onto the muddy ground, and men were moving crates on a hand dolly in a steady, practiced rhythm. Emma watched through the thermal scope, then switched to optical under the yellow light to get visual detail. The crates were aluminum framed, with stenciled markings she couldn't read at this distance. But the equipment being uncrated was visible enough. Heavy, angular, modular pieces that assembled into structures she recognized after a moment's study. Core sample analyzers, portable assay units, the kind of equipment used for rapid field assessment of mineral extraction samples. She had seen this equipment once before, in a briefing about illegal mining operations in Central Africa. The principle was the same regardless of geography. Set up in a remote location, extract samples from nearby formations, assess mineral content, report results to whoever was paying for the information. Rare earth assessment. Someone was running a prospecting operation. She scanned the terrain around the camp with new eyes, reframing everything she had observed. The Valley Depression, she had read it as a natural defensive feature, but it was also a geological feature, the kind of formation that appeared where ancient tectonic activity had pushed mineralized rock to the surface. The access road from the north, she had noted the truck traffic, filed it as logistics. But the road had been recently improved, graveled, drained. You didn't build that road for insurgent supply runs. You built it for equipment loads. The civilian workers she had seen this morning, now through the lit loading bay, she could see them carrying equipment components from the crates to a position inside the building. They moved with the exhausted efficiency of people doing unfamiliar physical labor under supervision. Emma found the man she had seen earlier, the middle-aged man who had been trying to shield a child behind a wooden crate at the southern perimeter. He was here, inside the loading bay, carrying a crate component that was too heavy for him. His shoulders dropped and his gait unsteady. A contractor with a rifle stood at the bay door watching. She kept her scope on the man. He put the component down where he was directed, straightened, pressed one hand briefly to his lower back, and then went to retrieve the next piece. Emma exhaled slowly. Whatever was in this valley, the people paying for it had decided that local labor was a resource to be used, and that local knowledge of the operation was a problem to be managed. The insurgent structure around the camp wasn't just cover, it was a management tool. The insurgents kept the population compliant, the contractors kept the insurgents compliant, and whoever was at the other end of that satellite uplink kept the contractors on schedule. She had her answer to the question she had written in her notebook that morning. She understood now what was worth a 48-hour extraction window. The question was what she was going to do about it. She watched the loading operation for 2 hours. By 2100, she had counted 43 civilian workers, men and women ranging in apparent age from late teens to well past 60, drawn from what she estimated was a single village or a cluster of farms from the surrounding valley. None of them wore identifying clothing. None of them appeared armed. Several showed signs of physical deterioration, consistent with prolonged, hard labor under poor conditions. The kind of condition that developed over weeks, not days. This operation had been running for a while. The contractors numbered 17 that she could confirm, probably more she hadn't seen. They operated in four-man teams, rotating through guard posts, escort duties, and perimeter security with the systematic efficiency of a private military company that knew its business. Their equipment was standardized. Their communication was tight. She had been monitoring the contractor frequency and heard disciplined radio traffic. Nothing wasted. Position reports on the quarter hour. These were not men improvising. They had a protocol and they were following it. At 21:17, something changed. One of the civilian workers, a woman, young, maybe 20, stumbled while carrying a component across the loading bay. She went down on one knee, the equipment spilling from her arms and clattering on the concrete floor. A contractor turned from his post, crossed the bay in 4 steps, and stood over her. Emma's hand moved on the rifle grip. She made herself be still. The contractor said something she couldn't hear. The woman looked up at him. He said something else, shorter this time, and gestured at the equipment on the floor. The woman began to collect it. The contractor watched for a moment and then returned to his post. Nothing happened to her. Emma noticed that she had been holding her breath. She let it out and filed the observation. The contractors were maintaining compliance through presence and threat, not through injury. Someone had given them guidance on how to manage the civilian population, minimizing visible harm, minimizing the kind of incident that generated documentation or witness accounts. This was sophisticated. This was planned by someone who understood exposure risk. At 21:45, Donovan came back. The radio signal arrived weak and fragmented. She could hear every third or fourth word, the terrain still chewing the transmission. But she got enough. If private contractors involved, command may already, she pressed the transmit key twice, the acknowledgement code, and waited. Do not, Repeat, do not transmit operational details. Primary channel, then static again. She had what she needed. Donovan had reached the same conclusion she had. The chain of custody on this operation had holes in it, and some of those holes might run upward rather than outward. She was not going to report what she had found through standard channels. She needed to think about what she was going to do with it instead. She tried the radio again at 2200 and got a better signal. Not good, but workable. Overwatch, secondary channel. You copy? 5x3. His voice came through uneven, but readable. Talk to me. She gave him the summary in the compressed version. Rare earth prospecting operation, corporate satellite relay, civilian labor under contractor coercion, integrated with insurgent camp as cover structure. 48-hour extraction window still active. Donovan was quiet for longer than she had ever heard him be quiet. Jack. She used his name deliberately. She never used his name. I'm here. His voice had changed. Not in tone, never in tone with Donovan, but in weight. Give me the contractor count again. Confirm 17. Estimate 3 to 5 more I haven't positively identified. Weapons? Standard PMC loadout. Suppressed rifles, sidearms, one crew-served position on the northeast perimeter I haven't been able to characterize at this light. Could be a machine gun position, could be something else. The sniper you haven't identified. Still unlocated. Western sector, high mobility, thermal capable. Different from the shooter who targeted my original hide. That was a camp security asset, less capable. The Western shooter is something else. How different? She thought about the 20-meter approach in the fog, the deliberate non-engagement, the choice to observe rather than commit. Doctrinal. His movement, his positioning discipline, his decision-making. This is someone trained by a Western military or by instructors from one. USMC? She had been waiting to say this. The firing discipline I've reconstructed from his position choices is consistent with the Type 3 hide selection criteria from the Advanced Sniper course at Stone Bay, specific to that curriculum. Stone Bay, Marine Corps Base, Camp Lejeune, where Donovan had taught for 9 years. Another pause. You're saying he went through my program? Or trained by someone who did? Carter, his voice was careful now, precise. If private contractors are involved at this level, with this kind of integration, the command structure authorizing this operation has access to special operations intelligence at a minimum. This didn't happen in a vacuum. He paused. Someone in the approval chain knows what's in that valley, and if they know and they authorize this operation anyway, then this isn't a rogue element, she finished. No, it's a protected one. She looked down at the camp below, at the satellite container with its blinking connection light, at the loading bay where the civilians were still working under contractor eyes. What do I do with this? She asked. Right now, you watch, you document, you don't move until you know what you're moving against. He paused one more time, and when he spoke again there was something in his voice that she had never heard there before. Something that might have been the edge of an old regret. And Carter, be careful what you report and to whom. Not everyone running this operation from the outside is going to want the truth about what's inside it. Understood. Check in at 0600 unless you have contact. The radio clicked off. Emma sat in the dark above the camp and turned his warning over in her mind. Donovan was not a man who alarmed easily. He had been in the business of hard truths for longer than she had been alive, and he had learned to present them flatly, without drama, because drama got in the way of clear thinking. The flatness of his warning was the most alarming thing about it. She found it at 0340. She had been executing a slow repositioning along the northern ridgeline, staying mobile, changing her observation angle every 90 minutes as protocol demanded, when her thermal scope caught the shape hanging in a tree approximately 80 meters to her northeast. She stopped. It was a helmet. hung from a branch by its chin strap, swaying slightly in the pre-dawn air. She approached with her rifle up, scanning the surrounding tree line for thermal signatures. Nothing. He had been gone long enough for any residual heat to dissipate from his recent position. She got within 15 meters of the hanging helmet and stopped to examine it through the scope. U.S. Army issue, MICH 2000 pattern, medium size. There was a bullet hole through the visor, clean entry, irregular exit, a 7.62 millimeter round by the diameter, and on the chin strap, a smear of paint. Not dirt, not mud, paint, applied deliberately, the kind of quick, dry olive drab that soldiers used for equipment marking. Except the color wasn't quite olive drab. It was blue-green, almost teal, the same shade as the marking on her own helmet, which she kept at the base of her neck where the chin strap attached. She had marked it herself 6 months ago on a long-hold deployment to differentiate her helmet from the pool of identical gear. A personal system, idiosyncratic, not standard. Nobody outside her immediate team on that deployment would know about it. He knew. The helmet was her size. The color was her mark. The bullet through the visor was a statement delivered in the only language a sniper conversation could use. I know who you are. I know what you carry. I know how to find you. She stood under the swaying helmet for a long moment, the forest cold and silent around her, and read the message a second time. Then she read it a third way, the way she hadn't read it first, because it was the less obvious interpretation, and less obvious was usually more important. He had hung the helmet in a tree. He had not left it at her hide, not placed it in her path, not used it to draw her into an exposed position. He had hung it where she would find it during a routine repositioning, where she would find it on her own terms, with cover around her, without being channeled. He was not threatening her. He was communicating with her. I know you are here and what you are doing. I am choosing to let you know that I know. Emma looked at the bullet hole in the visor. He was good enough to have put that round through her head 3 times in the past 24 hours and had chosen not to. She did not take the helmet down. She left it hanging. She moved on. She spent the 4 hours between 0400 and 0800 building his map. She worked the way Donovan had taught her to work when tracking an unknown sniper. Not by searching for him directly, which was how you got killed, but by reconstructing his decision-making architecture from the physical evidence he left behind. Every sniper had a doctrine. Every doctrine had a pattern. Every pattern had a logic. Find the logic and you found the man. She had 3 confirmed position sites. The original firing position at 1124, where he had killed Vasek, identified by the bipod mark near the pine trunk. The observation position at 1528, where he had circled her hide, identified by the branch movement and direction of approach. The close approach in the fog at approximately 1643, identified by sound alone, but confirmed by the direction of his withdrawal. She plotted them on her field notebook grid, triangulating against known landmarks. The pattern was consistent with a sniper who never fired twice from the same position. She had confirmed that from the primary firing site. It was also consistent with a sniper who habitually selected hides with western escape routes. She had noted that in Scene 6, and it was holding. Every known position had clear withdrawal to the west. Why west? She thought about it while she scanned the forest systematically, sector by sector, looking for any fresh sign. West meant away from the camp. West meant deeper into the forest, away from the valley, toward higher ground. If he had a vehicle or a base position, it was west. If he had a communication relay, it was west. His entire operational orientation was west-facing. He came from the west. He observed east toward the camp. He returned west. He was not embedded in the camp. He was adjacent to it. An external element running a parallel operation from a western base position. which was consistent with what she now knew about the contractor structure. The camp's security was the camp's own contractors. This man was something different, a separate asset, higher tier, running his own mission in the same theater. She had 3 possible firing positions she had not yet confirmed. A ridgeline notch at her northwest, approximately 340 meters, with a clean line to the camp's eastern perimeter. An abandoned watch platform visible at the northern treeline edge. Timber construction, 3 meters high, weathered but structurally present. A canopy platform she had detected at 0612 through the thermal scope. A temperature differential in the upper branches of a large Douglas fir, 200 meters west, that suggested a man-made structure, possibly a tree stand. She assigned probabilities: ridgeline notch, 30%, watch platform, 25%, canopy platform, 45%. The canopy platform explained the angle of the original shot, elevated, firing east-northeast through the specific gap in the canopy. It explained the thermal detection capability, elevated position, clear thermal line to the ground. And it explained the mobility. From a canopy platform, you could move along the upper branches of connected trees for a significant distance before descending, leaving minimal ground sign. He was above her. He had been above her the entire time. She filed the canopy platform as primary and began thinking about how to approach it without presenting a target. She heard the contractor radio at 0847. She had been monitoring the contractor frequency intermittently since the previous morning, recording traffic for later analysis. Most of it was routine: position reports, shift changes, the logistics cadence of a well-run security operation. She listened with half her attention while maintaining primary observation on the camp. Then, confirm. Primary objective is documentation, not elimination. Keep the American sniper in the overwatch position until extraction. Extraction window, -36 hours. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage the American asset until we are out of the window. She replayed the recording twice. Keep the American sniper in the overwatch position. They knew she was here. They had known, or suspected strongly enough to issue a standing order. And the order was not to kill her. The order was to keep her in place, to manage her position, to contain her operational behavior until the extraction window had closed, after which presumably the order would change. She felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. She had made a kind of peace with fear early in her career, understood it as information rather than feeling. This was colder than fear. This was the specific temperature of being used. The southeast shooter who had targeted her original hide, he hadn't been trying to kill her. He had been trying to displace her, to push her east, away from the western sector, away from the ghost sniper's operational area, moving her like a piece on a board. And the ghost sniper, the 20-meter approach in the fog, the deliberate non-engagement, the choice to observe. He wasn't letting her live because he didn't want to kill her. He was letting her live because someone had told him to. Keep her in place. She was not an observer. She was a contained asset. Someone had positioned her here, fed her a targeting mission that required her to be in this valley at this time, and then built a management layer around her to ensure she stayed useful to their timeline rather than disruptive to it. The targeting briefing, the clean intelligence package, the absence of any mention of contractor security in the pre-mission brief. Someone upstream had built this operation around her presence, had used her role as a legitimate U.S. military asset to provide a layer of operational legitimacy. A real American sniper on the ridge, holding her position, giving the whole enterprise the surface texture of an authorized military operation. If something went wrong, she was the story. Emma put the recorder away and looked at the camp for a long time. The loading bay was active again, the civilian workers beginning another shift, the contractors running their morning rotation with the efficiency of people who were almost done. 36 hours. That was the extraction window. 36 hours before the order changed. She pressed the radio key and tried for Donovan. Static. Complete static. The terrain had swallowed the signal entirely. She tried 3 more times over the next 4 minutes. Nothing. She was alone with what she had learned, and no one to think through it with. And the decision that was forming at the edges of her awareness was too large to make on her own. She needed his voice. She needed the specific gravity of his experience, the way he could lay a situation flat and let her see it clearly. She keyed the radio one more time. Nothing. Emma pressed the earpiece with one finger and listened to the static and understood that this was the moment she had been built for, and that no one was going to help her build it. She began to document. It was the action that felt most correct, most consistent with the soldier she understood herself to be, as opposed to the asset someone else believed they had placed on this ridge. A soldier with a mission gathered intelligence. A soldier evaluated targets. A soldier made the determination of what constituted a legitimate object of military action and what did not. She brought her scope to the satellite container and began methodically reading every external detail she could resolve. The antenna arrays, manufacturer markings partially visible on the mounting brackets. She couldn't read them at this distance, but the form factor was consistent with a commercial VSAT system, the kind used by resource extraction companies operating in remote areas where cellular infrastructure was absent. The cable runs. The conduit exiting the container base ran due south, buried or semi-buried, approximately 40 meters to the command tent. Secondary conduit ran north-northeast to the antenna tower. Both runs were weather-sealed with a gray polymer jacket she recognized as a specific brand used in outdoor industrial installations. The container itself. She could make out a faded stencil on the eastern face, partially obscured by the added antenna mounting bracket. Letters. She switched to maximum magnification and steadied her breathing. The first 3 letters were readable. G-E-R. A 4th letter was hidden behind the bracket. The 5th and 6th were readable. O-U or O-V. G-E-R-O-U. She wrote it in her notebook and stared at it. Giroux. A company name? A project designation? A personnel name? She shifted to the command tent. The tent flap was open at one end, and in the morning light she could see the interior with reasonable clarity. A folding table. A laptop, open, active, screen facing away from her. A figure at the table, not a contractor, not an insurgent, a man in civilian clothes. Button-down shirt, no weapon visible, working the laptop with the focused attention of someone in a business meeting. She watched him for 6 minutes. He checked his watch twice. He made 2 brief calls on a satellite phone, each less than 30 seconds. He typed. He reviewed whatever was on screen with a small, evaluative tilt of the head that meant he was reading data, not writing it. He was not military. He was not contractor. He was the person the contractors and the insurgents were protecting. The man at the laptop was the operation. If Emma eliminated the satellite uplink, destroyed the container's communication capability, the reporting chain between this valley and whoever was at the receiving end would be severed. Whatever data had been gathered, whatever assay results had been processed and transmitted, the pipeline would go dark. And without the reporting chain, the extraction, the movement of equipment, personnel, and whatever physical samples had been collected became uncoordinated, exposed. She could end this operation in 2 shots. The container's antenna arrays were at 340 meters. She had confirmed the range. Wind from the east at 3 knots. No fog at present. Clean shot. She could do this now. She held the crosshairs on the primary array and did not fire. Because below the command tent, moving along the inner compound toward the loading bay, was the man she had watched struggle with crates the night before. And behind him, smaller, staying close, a child. 8 years old, maybe 10. The child that the man had been trying to shield the morning before. She watched them move across her field of fire. She lowered the rifle. She tracked the man and the child for 11 minutes. She did not mean to. She had shifted her observation to the loading bay to assess the progress of the civilian work detail, and they had simply remained in her scope. The man working steadily, moving equipment components with the mechanical endurance of someone who had long since stopped thinking about what they were carrying or why, and the child staying close, doing small tasks, handing things, staying visible to the man. The child had made a calculation. Emma recognized it, the calculation that small people made in dangerous environments. The one that said, stay near the person who might protect you, even if they cannot fully protect you, because proximity to protection is better than distance from it. She had made that calculation herself at 15, in a different kind of danger, in a house rather than a forest. The loading bay had 4 armed contractors watching it. Any engagement with the satellite container would create a response that moved through this space within 90 seconds. The man and the child would be inside that response. Emma documented the man's approximate age, mid-40s, and the child's. She revised to 9, noticing the proportions more carefully. She documented their position in the work detail, their relationship to the armed supervision, the frequency with which the man checked the child's location. Every 30 to 40 seconds, a parent's interval. She was building a case for why she could not fire yet. She was also building a case for why she had to. The 48-hour extraction window had been issued approximately when, she checked her field notebook, 20 hours ago. That left 28 hours. In 28 hours, the equipment would be loaded. The civilian workers would be, what, returned to their village? Detained? She did not know. She did not know what the protocol was for a corporate extraction that used civilian labor under insurgent coercion. She suspected the answer depended on how much the civilians knew and whether that knowledge was considered a manageable exposure. The man paused his work and looked at the child, said something. The child looked up at him. A brief exchange. She could see the shape of it, even if she couldn't hear it. Reassurance. The specific tilt of an adult offering a child reassurance in circumstances that did not warrant it, offering it anyway because the child needed it, and the adult had nothing else to give. Emma lowered the scope from her eye and looked at the camp with her naked eye, reduced to shapes and distances. She could not fire with that man and that child in the compound. She would need to wait for a moment when they were not in the line of consequence. And she would need that moment to arrive before the extraction window closed and the order about her changed. 28 hours. She raised the scope again and went back to documentation. At 10:34, she found the canopy platform. She had been working a slow approach route to the northwest for the past 2 hours, using terrain features as cover, staying in the thermal shadow of the ridgeline. She found it where she had estimated, a constructed platform in the upper branches of a Douglas fir, roughly 4 meters of planking braced between 3 converging branches at approximately 15 meters above the ground. Weathered but solid, someone had built this before the current operation. It was empty, but the debris of occupation was present. A wrapper from a ration bar tucked into a corner. A slight wear pattern on the planking where a prone body had rested repeatedly. A single brass shell casing that had been pushed to the edge rather than retrieved. She picked up the casing and read the head stamp. 7.62 by 51 millimeters NATO. Federal gold medal match. Premium ammunition used by trained professionals. She was still holding the casing when she heard him below her. He was 15 meters away, standing at the base of the fir tree, looking up at her. She brought the rifle up by reflex. He did not raise his weapon. He was in his mid-30s, lean, with the particular leanness of sustained field deployment rather than gym conditioning. He wore civilian outdoor clothes, no uniform, no insignia. He had a rifle slung across his back and a sidearm on his thigh, but both were holstered or slung. He was standing with his hands at a visible neutral position, not raised but open, not threatening. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned his head slightly south toward the camp's southern perimeter and held the gesture, the specific attention directing that meant, "Look there, not at me." Emma kept her rifle on him and shifted her eyes south. A four-man contractor team was moving along the ridgeline approach, working northeast, approximately 200 meters out. They were tactical, spread formation, moving with purpose. They were not on a routine patrol route. They were searching. They were searching for her. The man at the base of the tree turned back to her. His expression was neutral, unreadable. He pointed south again. "They're coming," and then pointed west, along the ridgeline, that way. Emma looked at the four-man team, back at him. The team had closed to 160 meters, 90 seconds to her position at their current pace. She made her decision in 3 heartbeats. She came down the tree, moving fast, and when she hit the ground, he was already moving west. She followed. He moved in silence, and so did she. They covered 60 meters west along the ridgeline in 90 seconds. She tracked the contractor team with her peripheral awareness as she moved, monitoring them through the trees. At the 80-meter mark, she heard them reach the base of the Douglas fir. Heard one of them call out something in a clipped exchange. Heard them stop. The man ahead of her stopped behind a boulder and looked back. He was checking that she was with him. He pointed down, "Stay low," and then held up one finger. 1 minute. She pressed herself against the rock and controlled her breathing. Through the trees behind her, the contractor team was working the canopy platform site. She heard the sound of the tree being climbed, someone going up to check the platform. A pause, a call down, another exchange, then footsteps moving south again, away from her position. She exhaled. The man beside her was watching her with a clinical attention, the way a professional assessed another professional. He had the flat, evaluative eyes of someone who had been in difficult places for a long time and had stopped using facial expression as a communication tool. "You follow the contractor frequency?" he said. His voice was low, American accent. East Coast, she thought, Maryland or Northern Virginia. "Yes." "Then you heard the order." She looked at him. "Keep the American asset in position until extraction." He nodded once. "And after extraction?" she asked. He held her gaze. That order wasn't specified, which was its own kind of answer. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer that. Instead, "You found the satellite container. You know what the operation is. Rare earth prospecting, corporate extraction, protected by contractor security using insurgent cover." She watched his face. "You're not a camp contractor." "No. You killed Vasek." Vasek was becoming a problem for the operation. He was going to sell what he knew to a regional intelligence service. That would have exposed the corporate chain before extraction was complete. Emma parsed this. "You killed him to protect the operation." "I killed him to preserve the timeline." A pause. "The operation is not something I'm protecting." She studied him. "Then what are you doing here?" He looked through the trees toward the camp, and for a moment his expression shifted, not to emotion exactly, but to something that had the same weight. "The same thing you're doing, trying to figure out how to end it without getting both of us killed." Emma held this. The contractor team was no longer audible. The forest was quiet around them. She had her rifle in her hands, and he had his slung across his back, and they were standing in the cold morning forest, 30 meters from a boulder that had just hidden them from people who wanted to contain her and very possibly kill him. "Your movement discipline," she said. "Stone Bay." His eyes changed slightly. "Donovan trained you." "Yes." Something in the flat, professional face shifted. Not much, but enough. "He trained me too. 2008 cohort." Emma looked at him. Jack Donovan had trained this man. The same hands that had trained her had trained the person across from her, had given him the same curriculum, the same doctrine, the same always leave yourself away west discipline that she had been reading in his movement since the first displaced pine needles. He would call this a complicated situation, she said. The man almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face. He would use a different word, he said, a shorter one. Emma looked at the camp. 28 hours until extraction, 43 civilians, a child, a satellite uplink she needed to destroy, and a compound she needed to clear a path through, and 2 threat vectors she now understood better than she had 6 hours ago. I'm going to destroy the communications infrastructure, she said, satellite uplink and the relay in the command tent. Tonight, when the civilian detail is in their quarters. He was quiet for a moment. The crew served position on the northeast perimeter. You haven't characterized it. No. It's a 7.62 millimeter medium machine gun, 2-man crew. If you initiate with the satellite container, they'll traverse to the ridge within 30 seconds. Emma nodded. The generator is 20 meters south of the container. If the generator goes first, camp goes to battery backup. Takes 70 seconds to switch over. 70 seconds of full dark in the compound. That's my window. He looked at her for a long moment. I can neutralize the machine gun position. And then we both have what we came here for, and we both leave in different directions. Emma held the rifle and looked at the trees and thought about Donovan sitting 300 kilometers away with his cold coffee and his topographic maps. And she thought about what he would say if she told him she was about to run a joint operation with a contractor asset of unknown affiliation based on 12 minutes of conversation and a shared alma mater. She thought he would use the short word. Tonight, she said, 0200. He nodded once and was gone, moving west, silent as the first time she had tracked him through displaced pine needles and a broken branch. Emma watched him disappear into the trees and then turned east toward the camp and began planning the night's work. The radio came back at 16:30. She almost didn't try. The signal had been dead for 18 hours and she had stopped expecting it. But she keyed the transmit button on reflex during a quiet observation interval, and Donovan's voice came back so clearly it startled her. Carter, good to have you. She covered the distance between relief and professionalism in less than a second. Jack, I have a situation. Tell me, she told him. The extraction window, the contractor order, the civilian workers, the rival sniper who had turned out to be a former student of Donovan's own program. The satellite container, the corporate chain, the man and the child in the compound. The plan she had constructed for 0200. Donovan listened to all of it. When she finished, he didn't speak immediately. She heard him breathe, heard the specific quality of his silence. Not the silence of someone processing information, but the silence of someone deciding how much of something to give. 1989, he said finally. She waited. I was in Panama, not during the invasion, before it, 6 months before it. We had intelligence on a financial network running through a particular building in Panama City. The mission was to place a monitoring device on the building's communication infrastructure. He paused. When I got eyes on the target, I found out the building was also a residential facility. Families, civilian staff. What did you do? I reported it, through proper channels as instructed. Detailed assessment of civilian presence, recommendation to suspend mission pending review. Another pause, shorter this time. 3 days later, I received confirmation that command had reviewed my assessment and the mission was a go. They had decided the intelligence value outweighed the exposure risk. Emma held the radio and said nothing. I completed the mission, Donovan said. The building was never targeted after that. We only placed the monitor. Nobody was hurt. But the point isn't whether anyone was hurt. His voice was precise, without drama, delivering a fact rather than a lesson. The point is that I reported the truth, Command acknowledged it, and Command decided their timeline mattered more. That experience, that specific experience, is why I'm telling you right now, do not report this through the primary channel. Do not give Command the opportunity to make that calculation about your mission, because they'll make it the same way. Because some of them already have. Somebody upstream authorized this operation. Somebody with access to your deployment schedule, your assignment, your mission package. Somebody built this around you. Emma looked at the camp. The lights were on in the loading bay. "What would you do," she asked, "if you were here?" Donovan was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought the signal had dropped again. Then, "I do what you've already decided to do, Carter. I just want someone to know I thought about it carefully first." She felt something in her chest, not comfort exactly, the weight of being known by the right person. "The man you described," Donovan said, "the contractor, 2008 cohort, Stone Bay. If he went through that program in that year, I know which class. I know the kind of person who graduated from it." A pause. "I can't tell you to trust him. I'm telling you I know what I built." "That's enough," she said. 0200, he said. "Radio silence until you're clear. I'll be here." The signal faded. Emma put the radio down and looked at the darkening sky above the canopy and thought about a man in Panama City in 1989 who had reported the truth and had his truth acknowledged and overruled, and who had been carrying that for 37 years, and who was 300 kilometers away right now, awake, waiting. She began to prep her equipment for the night. She laid it out like a targeting solution. Not a feeling, not a conviction, a calculation. The same methodology she applied to any complex shot, working through each variable in sequence, assigning probability and consequence, arriving at a conclusion through logic rather than emotion, because emotion introduced drift. She started with the primary constraint, 36 hours until extraction. Minus the time already elapsed since that transmission, approximately 18 hours remaining. 18 hours before the civilian workers became a liability the contractors would need to resolve. 18 hours before the order about her changed. Primary objective, destroy the satellite communication infrastructure, container arrays and command tent relay. This severed the reporting chain and made the extraction logistically exposed. The coordinator at the laptop would lose contact with the corporate endpoint, which would trigger the extraction to either accelerate chaotically or abort. Acceptable collateral risk, 0 civilian casualties. This was not a moral preference, it was a mission parameter. If she accepted civilian casualty risk to destroy the infrastructure, she was making the same calculation the people running this operation had made. She was not willing to make that calculation. Therefore, the strike window was constrained to periods when the civilian work detail was in quarters and the compound around the container was free of non-combatant presence. Based on the operational patterns she had observed over 24 hours, that window existed between approximately 0100 and 0400. She had selected 0200 because the contractor rotation ran long shifts. The 2200 to 0200 team would be at the end of their physical and attentional peak, degraded by fatigue, while the 0200 to 0600 team would not yet have fully established their patrol patterns. Threat matrix: 17 confirmed contractors plus estimated 3 to 5 unconfirmed. Machine gun position northeast, to be neutralized by the contractor asset before her initiation. The south-southeast shooter who had tried to displace her earlier, she had no confirmation of his current position, which was a residual risk she could not fully calculate. Solution to residual risk: the generator strike first. 70 seconds of full dark. In those 70 seconds, she had 3 shots: generator, satellite array, and the command tent relay point she had confirmed was a junction box on the tent's exterior southern face. 3 shots at 3 targets ranging from 280 to 340 meters, in sequence, in the dark with thermal, in a window of 70 seconds. She dry-cycled the bolt 3 times and felt the mechanical certainty of it. She checked the ammunition she had set aside for tonight's work. 6 rounds of match grade, consistent head stamp, consistent weight. She was using 3. She had 3 in reserve. She thought about the man and the child. She had last seen them at 1800, moving from the loading bay to the civilian quarters, a low building at the camp's southern edge, furthest from the container and the command tent. They would be inside at 0200. The distance from their quarters to the first explosion radius was approximately 280 meters. They would be safe. She wrote it in her notebook. They will be safe, not as comfort, as a confirmed variable. Then she closed the notebook, checked her watch, and began the waiting that was the hardest part of any operation, the interminable stillness between the decision and the action, when everything was calculated and nothing was yet done, and the night was very long. The forest was absolute at 1:15, no wind. The fog had cleared entirely, leaving a sky bright with stars, and a cold that had descended from the upper ridgeline in the last 2 hours, settling into the hollow where the camp sat and turning every surface to a faint glitter of frost. Emma watched her own breath and controlled its visibility, keeping her exhales slow and dispersed, minimizing the thermal plume against the night air. She had moved to her final firing position at 0045. It was a new hide. She had spent 2 hours identifying it the previous afternoon, a position on the northeastern ridgeline that gave her simultaneous line of sight to the generator, the satellite container arrays, and the command tent junction box. The geometry required her to use 3 different aiming angles in rapid succession, which meant she had pre-mapped each one and assigned a physical reference for the transition between them. A knot on the fallen log to her left for the first shift, the edge of her bipod's left leg for the second. She verified the reference points now, in the dark, with her fingertips. Then she checked the camp one more time through thermal. The machine gun position on the northeast perimeter, 2 bodies, prone, both showing the slightly reduced thermal signature of men who had been still and cold for several hours. Fatigued. She watched them for 60 seconds. Neither moved. The command tent, 1 body, the coordinator still at his laptop, working late. She noted this and filed it. He was inside the tent, not beside the junction box. His presence did not affect the shot. The civilian quarters, 9 bodies inside, thermal signatures distributed across the floor space in the loose configuration of people sleeping. The man and the child were in there. She couldn't differentiate individuals at this resolution, but 9 bodies, all still, all in the correct position. The contractor rotation. She counted 7 bodies on active patrol, moving in the patterns she had memorized. The 2,200 to 0200 team, near the end of their cycle, moving with the reduced precision of exhausted professionals. Everything was where it needed to be. Her watch read 0148, 12 minutes. She pressed the transmit key once, the signal for the contractor asset. A single click came back from the west. He was in position. Emma settled into the rifle and let the world go quiet, the way it had to go quiet before the first shot of any operation. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of a different kind of attention. The specific narrowing of consciousness to the space between her eye and the reticle, between the reticle and the target, between the decision already made and the action not yet executed. She watched the machine gun position. She watched the generator. She waited for 0200. 0200 arrived without ceremony. Emma's watch hit the mark, and she was already in the respiratory pause, the reticle centered on the generator housing, a gray metal box sitting on a concrete pad 20 meters south of the satellite container, feeding power to the container, the command tent, and the northern perimeter lighting through a tangle of conduit that she had mapped in the afternoon light. The generator was a diesel unit, older, the kind that ran hot. She was not targeting the engine block. She was targeting the fuel line junction at the base of the housing, where a round penetrating the conduit fitting would turn a power failure into something louder. She fired. The round hit exactly where she had aimed. For 1 full second, nothing happened. She was already transitioning to the satellite array, using the knot on the log to anchor her left shift, bringing the crosshairs up and right to the primary antenna bracket. And then the generator let go with a deep, percussive thump that sent a column of orange light into the night sky and killed every electric light in the camp simultaneously. Darkness, complete and total, from the outside. Through her thermal scope, the camp was vivid. She saw bodies reacting, the contractor rotation freezing, turning, looking toward the orange, and she used their attention. The satellite array was a metal rectangle against a warm container body, easy to resolve in thermal. She fired once. The primary array went sideways on its bracket, cables parting, the mounting structure failing at the base. Not destroyed, damaged, but the connection was severed. She was already transitioning to the command tent junction box, using the bipod's left leg edge as her reference, dropping the muzzle 4 degrees in right, finding the thermal signature of the box against the cooler tent canvas. She fired a third time. The junction box sparked and went dark. 3 shots, 11 seconds elapsed. The camp was chaos. She watched it through thermal, not the disorganized chaos of a surprise force, but the complicated chaos of a trained force with multiple simultaneous emergencies and no communications infrastructure to coordinate through. The contractor rotation was moving but without direction, each team reacting to the nearest stimulus rather than executing a coordinated response. The command tent had emptied. She saw the coordinator's thermal signature moving fast toward the vehicle pool, a man who understood that the thing he had been sent to protect was no longer protectable, and that his own extraction was now the priority. She tracked him for 3 seconds and then let him go. He was not her target. To her north, the machine gun position had gone silent. She shifted her scope and found the northeast perimeter. 2 bodies, prone, not moving. The contractor asset had done his work cleanly, with the same precision she had come to expect from him. The camp's reaction was coalescing now, the trained contractors recovering from the initial shock, beginning to establish a defensive perimeter, moving in the purposeful patterns of professionals falling back on muscle memory when communications failed. She counted 8 active contractor positions spread across the northern and eastern perimeter. The remaining 9 or 10 she had identified were either inside structures, responding to the generator fire, or unaccounted for. The generator fire was doing work she hadn't planned for. The fuel line rupture had ignited a secondary pool at the base of the concrete pad, and the fire was spreading to a wooden equipment rack adjacent to the generator housing. Pallets, cabling, spare components, which added fuel and visibility and noise in roughly equal measure. The northern perimeter was lit orange. The contractors working that sector were backlit, their thermal signatures merging with the fire's output, making them harder to resolve clearly. Good. They were harder to resolve for her. They were also harder to resolve for each other. Emma reloaded with 3 fresh rounds, confirmed her position was still concealed, and returned to observation. The camp had lost its communications, its power, and its operational cohesion. The satellite extraction that the corporate chain had been counting on was now severed at the relay end. Whatever data had been transmitted before tonight was already gone. But nothing new would travel up that chain, and the coordinator who had been sitting at the laptop was currently running for a vehicle. She had done what she had come here to do. She had not been ordered to do it. She pushed that thought aside. She had work left. She heard the shot from the south at 0214. Single round, suppressed, from the lower ridgeline, the position she had identified as the south-southeast shooter's operational zone. The round struck the rock face 6 meters to her right, a clean impact that threw chips of stone across her right arm. She was already rolling left. Not him, not the contractor asset. This was the camp's security shooter, the less precise one, the one who had targeted her original hide and tried to displace her. He had relocated since she had driven him off the rock outcropping the previous afternoon, and he had found a new angle, a better angle. He had used the chaos of the generator strike to mask his movement, the noise and the light giving him cover to close the distance and establish a position that put her in a viable firing lane. She gave him credit for the patience of it. He had waited for exactly the right moment. She had rolled into a depression behind a root mass, and she stayed there for 30 seconds, breathing, listening, mapping his probable position from the shot angle. He was lower than before, maybe 180 meters south-southeast, on a secondary rock feature she had assessed as a moderate threat on her original terrain survey. She had rated it 40% probability. She had been wrong. She needed to move, and she needed to move without presenting a profile. The root mass gave her concealment, but not full cover. A second shot from that angle could find her if he had a good thermal read on her position. She had to assume he did. 20 meters northeast, there was a rock outcropping she had marked during her approach to the final firing position. Solid cover, good defilade from the south-southeast. 20 meters was too far to cover in one movement across open ground. She broke it into 3 segments. First segment, 5 meters, fast and low, using the root mass as departure cover. She moved on the exhale of a long breath, keeping below the sight line, making the 5 meters in 2 seconds, and pressing behind a fallen trunk. She waited. No shot. Second segment, 8 more meters, angling slightly north to use the trunk's shadow as concealment against the firelight from the burning generator below. She made it in 3 seconds. No shot. He was either repositioning, following her movement and trying to reestablish a firing angle, or he had lost her in the thermal noise of the fire. She gave it 5 seconds to determine which, then 7. At 9 seconds, she heard him. Not a shot, but the sound of movement on rock, the scrape of a boot sole on stone, coming from slightly north of the original position. He was repositioning, coming north, trying to find an angle over the terrain feature she was using as cover. The third segment was not a retreat, it was a turn. She came around the north end of the rock outcropping, staying below the crest, and worked west, toward him, not away, closing the distance while he was moving, and therefore making noise, and therefore not listening as carefully as he would when he stopped. She covered 25 meters in the time it took him to pick his next position. She heard him settle, the small, final adjustments of a shooter going prone, the bipod coming down. She was 40 meters from him. She could not see him. The terrain folded between them, but she could hear him with precision. She stopped. He fired. The round went northeast, past where she had been. He was working the last position he had resolved, running a search pattern. Emma came up on her knees, used the crest of a low ridge for a firing rest, found his thermal signature at 38 meters, bright against the cold rock, and fired once. The camp's south-southeast shooter did not move again. She stayed in position for 60 seconds, watching, listening. No secondary response from that direction. She verified the thermal signature was no longer active and then turned north. She had one problem remaining. The duel that had been building for 36 hours arrived at 0231. She had been working back toward the canopy platform, the Douglas fir, northwest, the logical position from which the contractor asset would maintain his overwatch on the machine gun sector, when her thermal scope caught him. Not the contractor asset, someone else. A contractor working alone, moving through the upper canopy with a deliberateness that told her he knew where the platform was and was going to it. He was good. Not as good as the ghost, not close, but skilled enough to have made it through the canopy without making noise she could hear from 60 meters. He was moving fast. He was going to reach the platform in 2 minutes, and the contractor asset was on that platform. She keyed the transmit button twice, the warning signal. One click back. He had seen it. Then a burst of suppressed fire from the platform. 2 rounds, rapid, directed south. She saw the moving contractor stumble in the branches, catch himself, and keep climbing. Hit, but moving. He reached the platform edge and came over it in a controlled roll. And for 3 seconds, she had 2 thermal signatures merged on the platform in a close quarters fight that she could not resolve clearly enough to engage without risking the wrong person. She moved laterally, west, trying to find an angle that separated the signatures. From the platform came the sound of something structural giving way, timber splintering under load, the crack of a support member failing. The whole structure lurched. She saw both signatures destabilize, reaching for holds, and then one of them went over the edge. It was the contractor, the camp's security shooter she had been tracking. He fell the 15 meters to the forest floor and did not get up. The other signature, the asset, was hanging from the platform edge, one-handed, the structure tilting at a 30-degree angle from the failed support. Emma was already below him. "Drop," she said, keeping her voice flat and her volume controlled. He dropped. She caught nothing. She was not trying to catch him, that was a movie, but she broke his fall angle with her shoulder, redirecting his landing enough that he hit the ground in a roll rather than a vertical impact. He came up on one knee immediately, weapon in hand, scanning. "Clear," she said. He looked at her. His left arm was not tracking right, held slightly out from his body, the movement limited. Hit during the platform fight. "How bad?" she asked. "Functional." His voice was even. She believed him. Through the trees below, the camp was continuing its collapse. The generator fire had spread to the equipment rack fully now and was licking at the corner of the nearest storage building. The contractor teams were pulling back from the perimeter, consolidating around the vehicle pool, making the calculation that every professional force made when an operation became unrecoverable. Extract what can be extracted, abandon what cannot. Emma watched the vehicle pool. 3 of the 4 trucks were running. The coordinator's thermal signature was in the lead truck's cab. The contractor asset watched with her. "Evidence," he said. "The laptop." She looked at him. "It's in the command tent." It was. He carried it when he ran. She found the coordinator's truck again, a rectangular thermal shape on the seat beside him. Laptop bag. Emma took a long breath. The coordinator was in a vehicle, surrounded by moving contractor personnel, 60 seconds from the northern access road. Anything she did to that truck put contractors and the coordinator in the same response. She was not going to do anything to that truck. "Let him go," she said. The contractor asset looked at her without expression. "He has the laptop," she said. "Whatever's on that laptop leads somewhere. If he disappears in a forest fire with the laptop, it disappears with him. If he drives out of this valley with it, it goes somewhere. Somewhere has people. People leave trails." A pause. "You trust that process?" "No," she said flatly, "but I trust it more than I trust a clean kill with no documentation of what happened here." He looked at the trucks pulling out of the vehicle pool. Then he nodded, once, and that was all. They watched the convoy find the access road and the headlights disappear into the northern forest. The contractors finished their extraction by 0248. They moved efficiently, as she had expected. Personnel first, sensitive equipment second, everything else abandoned. The remaining contractor teams consolidated on the vehicle pool, loaded into the 2 remaining trucks, and followed the convoy north. No stragglers, no hesitation. These were professionals, and professionals knew when a position was no longer tenable. What they left behind was a camp without a center. The insurgents, the actual insurgents, the men who had understood themselves to be running this camp, who had been managed and protected and used by the contractors without fully understanding the mechanism, found themselves suddenly without their contractor infrastructure. Emma watched them through thermal as the realization moved through the camp. The visible authority figures consulting, gesturing, a cluster forming around the command tent, which was now dark and empty. Someone going to the satellite container and finding it inert. The specific paralysis of people who had been operating as part of a larger machine and could not locate the machine. The generator fire reached the storage building at 0251. Not a violent ignition. The building caught slowly, the old timber taking the fire in stages, and the growing light threw the camp into sharp relief. Men moved away from it. The ammo shed, which sat 30 meters from the storage building, became the immediate tactical concern. Everyone in the camp understood the proximity of fire to ammunition, and the decision to pull back from the northern half of the camp was made collectively and without apparent command direction. The civilian quarters sat at the southern edge, well clear of the fire's current extent. At 0257, the door to the civilian quarters opened. The man emerged first. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking north at the fire, looking at the withdrawing armed men, reading the situation with the careful attention of someone who had been reading dangerous situations for weeks and had learned to distinguish the kinds that required stillness from the kinds that required movement. He looked back into the quarters and said something. Then he stepped out and moved south, along the perimeter fence, and behind him the civilians followed in a quiet, ordered column. 17, 20, more. They moved without running, without noise, following the man who had read the situation correctly. The armed men were looking north, and south was unguarded, and the forest was close. Emma watched them go. The man was near the rear of the column. He had the child by the hand, and he was moving at the pace of the slowest person ahead of him, an older woman who walked with a pronounced limp. He did not hurry her. He matched her pace. At the tree line, the column disappeared. Emma kept her scope on the southern perimeter for 3 minutes after the last civilian cleared it. No contractor pursuit. The contractors were already north and moving. No insurgent reaction. The insurgents were managing their fire problem. The civilians were in the forest, moving south toward whatever valley they had come from. They were out. She had not counted it as a variable in her tactical calculation, had not allowed herself to count it, because the moment you made a person's safety contingent on your operational success, you had introduced an emotional drift into your firing solution that could get you and them both killed. But now they were out, and she let herself know it, and it felt like the exact right weight. The contractor asset was beside her, watching the same thing. Column of civilians, moving south, he said, as though noting a weather condition. All mobile. Yes, Emma said. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. The helicopter arrived at 0512. Emma had made the call through the emergency frequency at 0320, using the authentication code that bypassed the standard comms chain and went directly to the JSOC duty officer. She gave a compressed report. Overwatch position compromised. Operation concluded. Extraction required at primary LZ. She gave nothing else. The duty officer asked 3 questions, received 3 precise answers, and told her 90 minutes. She spent the 90 minutes in the forest, east of the camp, maintaining observation distance. The fire had spread to a second storage building and was self-limiting. The overnight cold and the damp ground were keeping it from running. The insurgents had established a loose defensive perimeter around the southern half of the camp and were, as best she could assess, waiting for dawn before they decided what to do with what was left. The contractor asset was gone. He had moved west at 0302, steady and unhurried, the way she had seen him move since the first displaced pine needles 2 days ago. He had not said goodbye. He had given her a single look that contained a complete professional acknowledgement. I know what we did. I know what it cost. I will not complicate your extraction with my presence. And then he was part of the dark. She did not know his name. She thought that was probably appropriate. The helicopter was a Black Hawk running dark. No nav lights, thermal shielded, flaring into the LZ with the controlled aggression of a crew that had done this 100 times in 100 bad locations. Emma was at the LZ marker before the landing skids touched. The crew chief gave her one look, took in the rifle and the pack and the 48 hours of field wear, and pointed to the interior without a word. She climbed in. The door closed. The helicopter lifted. Through the window, she watched the camp recede below. The orange glow of the fire, the black shapes of the structures, the thin ribbon of the access road disappearing north into the dark forest. She watched it until it was too small to distinguish from the surrounding landscape. Then she faced forward. The crew chief handed her a radio. The JSOC duty officer's voice was professional, clipped, walking her through the post-operation protocol. Casualty report, equipment status, threat assessment on the extraction route, standard questions from a standard template. He asked about the camp. Insurgent leadership neutralized, Emma said. Command infrastructure destroyed. Operation concluded. A pause. No mention of contractor presence in sector? The duty officer asked. Emma looked at the dark forest passing below the Black Hawk. Negative, she said. No contractor presence confirmed in sector. The duty officer logged it and moved to the next question. Emma handed the radio back to the crew chief and looked at the window. No mention of contractor presence. No mention of rare earth prospecting, civilian labor, corporate satellite relay, or a 48-hour extraction window that had ended with a convoy driving north into the dark. No mention of what she had actually found in that valley and what she had actually done about it. The official record would say insurgents. The truth was in her field notebook, encrypted in her private shorthand, documented with the methodical precision she had applied to every observation over 48 hours. The company name partial, GEROU, and the manufacturer markings she had noted, and the contractor radio recordings, and the timeline of the civilian labor operation, and everything else that was too important to report to a duty officer who might log it in a system that someone upstream had eyes on. She would give it to Donovan first. He would know what to do with it, or he would know who would. He called her at 800 when she was in a forward operations facility 300 kilometers east, clean clothes and a hot cup of coffee that she had not touched because the warmth of holding the cup was enough for now. Jack, you're out. Not a question. Out and clean. Losses? None ours, she paused. One wounded on the Allied side, non-critical. He understood what she meant by Allied. She heard him exhale something that might have been relief. The camp? He asked. Civilian labor extracted, uninjured. Communications infrastructure down. Corporate asset evacuated north with a laptop. She paused. I let him go. Silence on the line. Jack, I heard you. His voice was measured. Tell me the reasoning. She told him about the laptop, about trails, about disappearing evidence versus documented evidence moving toward a destination. Another silence then. The partial company name you logged. GEROU. 4 letters obscured by the mounting bracket. I have some ideas about what that might complete to, he said. I'm going to make some calls. You should know the secondary comms chain may be monitored. I'm not using the secondary comms chain. His voice had the dry precision of a man who had been making careful calls for 31 years and had his own methods. Carter, yes. The decision you made last night about how to end that operation. The decision not to follow the assignment as briefed. A pause. That's the hardest kind of call there is. Not the shot. The decision not to take the shot you were sent there to take, and to take a different one instead. She waited. You made the right call, he said. 6 words. She had not understood until this moment how much weight 6 words could carry when they came from the right person. She sat with them for a moment in the forward operations facility, with its institutional furniture and its fluorescent lighting and the untouched coffee going cold in her hands. "How did you know I would?" she asked. "Because you came up through this work the right way," he said. "Because you ask the hard question before you act, not after." She thought about this, about the man and the child who had walked south through the fence line into the dark forest, about the deliberate non-shot she had made over and over in the past 48 hours. Vasich's replacement never appeared. The coordinator let go. The satellite container held until the compound was clear. The hardest shooting she had ever done had been the moments when she hadn't fired. "Go sleep," Donovan said. "We'll talk again when I have something on the company name." "Copy that." "Carter." His voice was quieter now, not softer. Donovan was never soft, but at a different frequency than his operational voice. "The man I trained, the 2008 cohort, he made it out?" "Yes." A pause that was almost nothing. "Good," he said. The line went quiet. The new assignment arrived at 1400, logged in her secure mission queue with the standard formatting and the standard classification header and a set of briefing materials she had not yet opened. She sat in the forward operations facility looking at the subject line on the screen. Different theater, different target profile, different tactical environment, urban this time, which meant different problems, different patients, different architecture of observation and waiting. Same structure underneath. Someone wanted something eliminated or observed or documented or stopped. And the mechanism for doing it was a woman on a ridge or a rooftop with a scope and 48 hours of stillness and the willingness to ask hard questions before she acted. She thought about what Donovan had said on the Panamanian operation in 1989, about reporting the truth through proper channels and having the truth acknowledged and overruled, about completing the mission anyway and carrying the weight of that for 37 years. She thought about the field notebook in her pack, with its encrypted observations about a valley in Eastern Europe and a partial company name and a documented chain of events that no official report would contain. About the contractor asset moving west at 0302 with a damaged left arm and no name and a shared curriculum and whatever he was going to do next in whatever direction his own mission pointed him. She thought about the man and the child. She did not know where they were now. In their village, she hoped. Back in whatever life the operation had interrupted. She would never know for certain. She opened the new briefing materials and began to read. The world had another place that needed someone to look at it clearly. She was still the person who could do that. She picked up her rifle at 1430 and ran the function check she always ran before deployment. Bolt, chamber, scope mount, suppressor thread. And when she was done, she looked through the scope at the wall of the forward operations facility across the room. Nothing through the lens but concrete block and a water stain in the corner. Nothing tactical, nothing operational. Just the world as it appeared at 9 times magnification, stripped of its middle distance, its peripheral blur, its ambient noise, reduced to the particular clarity that only this instrument produced. She thought about what you saw from the other end of it. After 48 hours in the trees above that valley, watching through glass while the world below arranged and rearranged its secrets. The people running the operation had believed they were invisible. They had built layer upon layer of cover. The insurgents over the contractors, over the corporate chain, over whoever sat at the receiving end of the satellite uplink. And each layer had been designed to absorb scrutiny and deflect it. They had been right that most observers would stop at the outer layer. Most observers would see insurgents and report insurgents and go home. They had not counted on someone patient enough to keep looking. She lowered the rifle. A sniper saw more than targets. She understood that now not as a lesson, but as a fact about the work. The peculiar, specific, unglamorous fact that the most important thing the scope did was not magnify the shot. It was magnify the truth. It showed you what was actually there, stripped of the distance and the noise and the convenient simplifications that allowed complicated things to remain hidden. The shot was the last thing. The looking came first. She put the rifle back in the drag bag and picked up the new mission briefing and walked out of the forward operations facility into the cold morning of a different country. Somewhere west of a forest in Eastern Europe, a man was moving with a damaged arm toward whatever his mission pointed him at next. Somewhere south of a burning camp, 43 people were walking home. Somewhere, a partial company name was completing itself in Donovan's careful hands. She had more looking to do.